I'm delighted to be joined today by Alan Gilpin. I'm sure most of you will already know him already. He's Managing Director and COO, of World Rugby. So Alan, it's great to see you. Despite everything going on, we're still doing our Zoom video calls and things like that. So can you just obviously tell us a bit about yourself, your career sort of journey to date? And I know you've had a lot of standout or highlight moments, but maybe you can just pick one or two to share with us.
Absolutely. So yeah, hi Katie, nice to see you. Welcome to my spare room, which is becoming a more familiar venue to people who know me. Yeah, look, I mean, my background, I was originally a lawyer. So qualified as a lawyer and but obviously passionate sports fan. I played a lot of sport in my younger years, including a lot of rugby, and so was very much I guess looking at some point to combine a career with a passion, and was lucky enough to be able to do that as a lawyer. I joined one of the big international sports management and rights agencies, IMG, as a lawyer back in 2000, and quite quickly found myself, which was no great hardship as a big rugby fan, quite quickly found myself working for IMG on Rugby World Cup and their representation of Rugby World Cup's commercial rights, which was really exciting. And my first World Cup kind of experience from a career perspective was Rugby World Cup 2003 in Australia. So I got to spend a number of months in Australia and experience the tournament and be very much part of that. And certainly as an Englishman back in those days with England winning a World Cup, it was a great experience. So that certainly stands out to me as one of the highlights of my time on World Cup. And I've been involved in Rugby World Cup on that side, on the commercial rights side, for a number of editions. I left IMG back in 2009 actually to become part of a commercial business for the London 2012 Olympics. So again, a real career highlight. The opportunity to be kind of intimately involved in Olympic Games in your home country is certainly something I would recommend to anybody. And it was a fantastic sort of 3.5 years and an amazing event to be involved in terms of London 2012. And then I came back into Rugby World Cup when I took the role as head of World Cup for World Rugby. And since then, I've kind of progressed into a COO of World Rugby role as well. So, I mean, look, masses of highlights, and certainly amongst them, Rugby World Cup last year in Japan in 2019. A long journey for us to deliver an outstanding World Cup with our colleagues in Japan, in a country that hadn't hosted a Rugby World Cup before, hadn't had that big event experience in our sport before. Obviously, had hosted other big events, and I think the sense of pride we probably all had in delivering that event, and some of the challenges we faced, with typhoons and other things back in the days when cancelling a few games seemed like a big deal, which it was at the time. Obviously, COVID has come to us since, and now we've cancelled, unfortunately, as most sports have, a lot more than a small number of matches. But 2019 Japan, a massive highlight. But I think probably the biggest highlight all through that sort of 20-year plus journey for me is the people. And I think, in the sports business and sports industry, we deal with some outstanding people, some incredibly committed people. I don't think there's an industry where people work harder, and that whole teamwork and that whole solidarity kind of values and ethos that come through when you work on big events. And so the people and the friendships probably for me are the real highlight.
And it would probably make sense there to go on to the question that we had down. But, obviously, like you say, back in 2019, you had the problem with the typhoons and you had to move a couple of events, and it was like, crazy times. Little did you know what was coming down the road when 2020 hit us. So, obviously, great for you guys that you got your marquee event done and dusted in 2019, all with the little bit of hiccups along the way. But, what has COVID meant for you guys? I should imagine the challenges that logistically, operationally, perhaps you can just tell us how you're sort of keeping this train moving forward.
Well, we're trying to. I think, like most sports, and certainly in our sort of international federation world, and the challenges, for rugby around the world, is it is for most sports. We're certainly not unique in that. Is that COVID's been devastating, and it's devastating because the vast majority of our ecosystem, if you like, in elite rugby, needs match day revenue to make it work. So it needs crowds. Obviously, not only have the matches in recent times not been possible, but even then we've seen a return to play, as we have in a number of parts of the world. A lot of that is without crowds, and that is incredibly financially challenging. And even now, as we look into the sort of October, November period at the internationals that will take place here in Europe and also in Australia for the Rugby Championship, there's doubts and still discussions around what levels of crowds will be involved. And we know in Europe that's very unlikely. So there's a huge financial impact that goes from the international game all the way down through the club game at a professional level. But probably most concerning and the biggest challenge is the community game. That boys and girls all through the rugby playing world who would be in their rugby clubs either haven't been or now as they're returning to a sort of different set of circumstances. And the club game needs the funding that's generated throughout the sort of international rugby ecosystem. So that's the big challenge, again, as it is for many sports. I think we were very fortunate as a sport and as for World Rugby as an organisation, as you say, to get our World Cup played at the end of last year. I do stop and wonder sometimes what it would have been like to be rearranging that as many other major world championships have been. We would have had rugby sevens in the Tokyo Olympics this year, which was obviously a huge moment for the sevens version of rugby and a huge amount of preparation over a number of years. So that's been incredibly challenging in terms of Olympics in Tokyo not happening. Obviously, we, like everybody else, are hugely hoping and planning for the games to be next year. The knock-on effect of that is that we've cancelled a large number of our World Rugby, our HSBC World Rugby 7 Series events, and they are events that support the preparation and qualification of the teams for the Olympic Games. So there's some real challenges around when we can return to play for sevens rugby, and we hope that's in the new year with a revised calendar for the sevens game leading up to Tokyo. So there's those sorts of challenges throughout the sport. We've cancelled age grade tournaments from a World Rugby perspective, but again, it's not our main concern, in all honesty, isn't the World Rugby sort of place in the sport. It's what it means for our member associations. It's what it means for the club game across professional leagues, and really what it means for the community game and the boys and girls that we want to see playing the game. So, like many sports, we've got to do our best to be kind of adaptable, resilient, provide the support that we can where we can, and that's included financial support for a lot of our members, and try to keep doing that and keep being positive in our planning to return to play for as much time as possible. And ultimately, and again, like a lot of sports, try and see the opportunities that exist to come out of this crisis in a different place, and be forward thinking about it.
And sort of taking that a step forward, please God, when we're the pandemic is, albeit a very nasty, distant memory, how do you think this whole thing will have changed the sort of sports industry in general? What do you think the fan experience and how you deliver a major tournament is going to have to morph moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, isn't it? I think there are probably some short-term realities to that, and hopefully there are some longer-term realities that do become more like a normality. Although I think the sports industry probably is, or the sports and entertainment industry has probably changed forever, as many industries are through this crisis. And again, at the end of the day, we're not putting people on the moon or life-saving operations. We're about entertaining people, providing health and well-being opportunities, and using sport to improve people's lives, hopefully, ultimately. So we've got to keep that context, I guess, in everything we think. But I think the short-term challenges and opportunities are, for everybody, what does 2021 look like? And we've got, as I say, a rearranged, hopefully, Olympic Games that's really important to the global profile and promotion of sevens. And we've got the marquee moment in our women's game next year with the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand for women's 15s. And as you can imagine, a huge amount of contingency planning going on at the moment around that tournament, which isn't until September and October next year. So hopefully it is the other side, as you say, of that kind of nasty memory of a crisis and a pandemic. But we're working, for example, with New Zealand Rugby and the New Zealand government on what they call managed isolation quarantine, and that's what the Australian rugby team, the Wallabies, are currently in New Zealand, preparing for two Bledisloe Cup matches over the next 2 Sundays, and trying to apply the science, if you like, and the learnings from what they're doing now to what a multi-team tournament in New Zealand would look like at the end of next year. And there's all kinds of operational challenges going through testing, different isolation bubbles, what that means for teams' preparation and training in advance of the tournament once they arrive in the host country, and then how you play those multiple fixtures across multiple venues in the right conditions. Massively pleasingly, New Zealand obviously is in a position where at the moment, if the current circumstances prevail, then crowds are able to attend rugby and sport, and therefore it could be a tournament that looks something like it should look. So I think there's those types of realities for next year. And again, I know many sports are grappling with that, as are the IOC and the Tokyo Organising Committee in terms of Tokyo 2020. And then there's the longer term piece, and can we get back to full venues globally? Can we get back to full international travel schedules for international sport? And that's obviously going to take a lot of patience and, again, resilience and a lot of work with a lot of different industries. I mean, at the moment, it's difficult to even have that conversation with the airline industry about what might be possible in the future. And again, a 7 series that we run, an international kind of Grand Prix series, the idea of having teams crisscrossing the world on a sort of constant basis, we need to really think through what that looks like in a hopefully post-COVID world. So there are definitely challenges. I think more broadly, the other challenge for the sports industry is probably what the crisis has done in terms of hugely accelerating maybe some media and consumption trends that were happening anyway. So the move to digitization, a move away from traditional television consumption in terms of premium sport, and maybe that accelerating competitiveness for an audience. As rugby, we are fortunate to be a very strong, high demand sport in a number of countries, and more of a niche sport in some other parts of the world. And I think what we're probably going to see next year, and as we move forward, is broadcasters and media partners focusing their investment and their scheduling on really premium content that they know will drive the audiences they need to maintain advertising revenues and so on. And it becoming increasingly difficult, if you're not premium content, to find not only revenue that you rely on so much to invest in sport, but also to generate eyeballs and find partners that can help you. And that inevitably is going to lead to an acceleration in the move towards kind of direct to consumer OTT streaming solutions for sports, and maybe aggregation of content around that. And again, that's challenging and potentially expensive, but there's great opportunity for sport in that to find audiences in different ways. And we are, like a lot of organisations, trying to be as innovative, creative, positive about that as we can be.
And then finally, Ellen, obviously you were supposed to be with us in Liverpool next week for ALSD International, which, like everything else that was due to take place in 2020, is now moved. So now you'll be joining us in March of next year. And you're going to be the sort of headline expert on the big event, how to maximise your value. So obviously, as someone that, you've done a London 2012, you've been involved in multiple Rugby World Cups at this stage. So what would you say have been your key learnings through that journey when it comes to, delivering a return on investment?
Yeah, good question. I mean, look, I'm obviously disappointed, like many, not to be in Liverpool next week as a lifelong Liverpool fan. I was certainly looking forward to being at Anfield again, and so hopefully we'll all be able to get together there in March. I think in terms of big events and return on investment, again, if I bring it back specifically to rugby and our view of it, I mean, our big events, our pinnacle events in rugby, certainly the men's and women's World Cups, World Cup in sevens and very much the Olympic Games in sevens. You know, they're so important for the sport, and they're so important for the sport for two sort of return on investment reasons. One is, yes, the commercial rights and the revenues that we can generate from those events are absolutely vital to how we can grow the sport for the intervening years. You know, all the money that World Rugby uses to invest in rugby around the world, whether that's providing funding to regions and unions and development programs, to providing high performance assistance, to driving player welfare initiatives and the research and work we do in those areas, all of that is funded by those pinnacle events and the revenues that those pinnacle events generate. So that's vital to the sport's survival. The other part of the return on investment is people, is eyeballs. You know, we need those big moments, those big pinnacle events to drive interest in our sport and to create audiences. And we know that World Cups and Olympic Games for rugby do that more than anything. So that's our focus when we're planning for big events, is how do we maximize those outcomes. I think in terms of what we've learned along the way, and what I've learned along the way is, you know, and it's probably quite dry, but there is no substitute for a huge amount of planning, bringing on board the right expertise. And we're very lucky in the teams that I'm privileged to lead, that we've got some amazing people. So having that expertise, having people with the right experience, we saw that in Japan, injecting international experience into a major event market with local knowledge, to get that planning right, and then you can get the delivery right. But if you don't get the planning right, you know, you're relying very much on a lot of luck in terms of delivering that return on investment that you need. So very much the people, the planning, the execution. And then, as we learned in Japan last year, it's about having contingency plans, and it's about making sure that you've got contingencies for the contingencies. And again, that's the situation that COVID has reminded everybody of, you know, very firmly. You've got to really plan for every eventuality and then some.
Perfect. Well, that was...
I've got someone with a chainsaw outside now, please.
Perfect. Well, that's a good enough place as ever to stop there. So thank you so much, Alan. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person at Anfield come March. Hopefully, you know, we'll have ALSD International will be hybrid with both their, you know, virtual and in-person event. And you'll be busy preparing, ready for your Women's Rugby World Cup as well. So great. Thanks for those insights anyway, Alan. And
pleasure. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.